Hello there, my name is Nicholas Yong. I'm a senior editor of Yahoo News. We are here today with the former Foreign Minister George Yeo, who's written a new book called Musings. It's the first of a three-part series, and it touches on a wide range of topics from China to India, his personal life, his political career, and of course Singapore itself. Good morning, Mr. Yeo. How are you?
Good.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to start by asking, why write the book in this particular fashion instead of a straightforward memoir?
Because I was not intending to write a memoir. And the idea for this book came from Un Tai Ho, who asked me if I would agree to a series of 10 to 12 interviews on different subjects, and then he'll compile it into a book. I thought that sounded easy enough. So in a moment of weakness, I said, yeah, let's do it. And after the first two interviews, I decided that even though I had points jotted down, the ideas were too scattered, and I felt it was unsatisfactory. So for subsequent sessions, I actually spent 10-12 hours writing out what I wanted to say. We met every week on a Monday morning, and this went on for 6 months. It kind of grew and grew organically until we had 25 chapters. Right. In the end, we decided it can't be done in one volume. So we said, okay, you'll be in 3 books. But they're just a series of musings. It gives me some latitude not to have to concentrate on one subject or to develop it as if I were submitting a thesis. These are just ideas I'm expressed to you in a conversation. Right. And I think I told Tai Ho, had I known at the beginning what it would involve, I would never have started.
So I think one of the most engaging parts of the book is when you open up about your personal life. You talk at length about your wife and your son's illnesses. You talk about your eldest brother who had schizophrenia. So did you hesitate at all about revealing such very intimate details about your life?
No. I think partly because I reached a point in my life where you're more relaxed. And I thought it may give comfort to readers that, as they say in English, into every home some rain must fall. That we're human beings, that life is rough, there are ups and downs, there are problems, there are issues, some not resolvable. So in a sense, by being frank, it allows others to be frank, and it makes for more comfortable, more honest communication and easier relationships. When I was an MP and parents come to see me about schizophrenic children, so I knew exactly what they face.
Right.
And I told them, yeah, my brother was schizophrenic too. Oh. And it helped them to open up that, yes, there's someone who understands what we had to go through. When I thought back on my own parents, it was very tough for them. And people were not always sympathetic.
Was there anything that you consciously decided to leave out of the book? Perhaps things that maybe were too controversial or too sensitive, or maybe even like your family might have objected to it?
I didn't consult my family. I didn't consult my siblings or my relatives. My wife and children knew that I was embarked on this, and I showed them certain sections. They had heard me before, so I'm not sure they would have gone through what I wrote on their own if I didn't ask them. I had certain principles which guided my expressions, which was that I should not be negative. I should be frank, but I should not be negative. And where possible, I should be hopeful. And people who read the book should be uplifted, not depressed. Not feeling that, oh, it's all so sad, it's all so painful. So the book is written without rancor. If there are negative emotions, they are written in sorrow, not in anger. So these are little internal guidelines I have. They're like a compass. to make sure that I write the book in a particular way. But in a sense, it also reflects who I am and the way I communicate. So the way I communicate in the book, I think is a fair representation of the way I communicate to friends and to maybe even to strangers.
I want to ask now go on about your political career.
Yes.
So you were at MITA, the Health Ministry, MTI, and of course you were Foreign Minister for a long time. Which was your favorite ministry to serve at? Where do you think you contributed the most?
So many people have asked me this question. I always hesitate because I don't really have a favorite ministry. They are different flavors, and I was lucky that they were all interesting to me, and I was able in each and every one of them to make certain contributions. But I can tell you one thing though, that my most stressful ministry was MITA, the Ministry for Information and the Arts, which I held for 9 years, longer than I did the Foreign Ministry. And there I had to deal with journalists like yourself. I had to deal with film producers, with artists, deal with religion, heritage, museums, libraries. And cultural issues are the most sensitive because we are a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual society. And people feel strongly about their identities. And if they feel that you disdain them or shortchange them, they get upset very quickly. And they suddenly, from little things, draw huge conclusions. And unless the emotions are quickly stilled, they become disproportionate. When I was in MITA, it was almost as if there could be explosions at any time, you know. So the day I left MITA, I said, now I can enjoy television and enjoy reading newspapers without always being concerned that here there's an imbalance, there is something which should not have been put out that way, and so on.
So it sounds like you had to be even more of a diplomat at MITA than you were at MFA.
You're right. It was good training for MFA. I mean, I'll give you an example, which I wrote about in my third series. We inherited from the British Christian broadcasts on Sunday. And Lee Kuan Yew had an agreement with the Malay community that the call of the Azan would be on radio. So we had Muslim broadcasts on the Malay channel. The Buddhists were upset. How come you have Islam, you have Christianity, you don't have Buddhism? So we said, okay, let's have Buddhist broadcasts on some days, Vesak or whatever. Then one Malay intellectual said, but why can't Islam be on the English radio station? Because everybody accesses the English radio station. You know, you can never please everybody. So in the end, I said, okay, I'll just reduce Christian broadcasts on the English station. I will increase other religious broadcasts, including for the Sikhs on certain days. Anytime I said, look, if you want to have a debate in Parliament, we have a debate in Parliament, then we do something drastic. But everybody will be unhappy. But I communicated with all groups throughout that period. So in the end, we were able to achieve a new equilibrium, which everyone thought was okay, you know, fair enough. Of course, no one was perfectly happy, and have some peace. But it required a lot of dainty footwork.
Walking on a tightrope.
Yes, and for quite a long period of time. And that's just one subject. One day, a Muslim sect considered heretical by Muiz, Ahmadiyya. There was a complaint against it by Muiz that we should ban their tracks. What do? I said, we have no competence in this area to judge what is heretical, what is not. So we took a simple position. When Salman Rushdie's book came out, we banned it immediately. Because if you try to argue the merits and demerits of censoring such a book, you'll get nowhere. you only get people angry. So we decided, no, let's have some peace and quiet, we just ban it. Not that you can't access it, you can always access it. But banning it is like virtue signaling to the community, that, yeah, this is troublesome, let's not have this trouble. Yeah. But earlier, there was a book called The Last Temptations of Christ. But the book was initially banned, and it was in the pew, I think, by Minister Rajaratnam, and we decided to unban it. Because Christians feel certain issues differently from the way Muslims feel certain issues. And we can't say, look, we should treat everybody equally. If we treat everybody equally, we have a lot of trouble. So you have to say, look, let's be practical, let's be commonsensical. This is very important to you, we'll be sensitive. This is not so important to you, so that's okay. But the other issues important to you, which may not be important to him,
right?
So we'll customize it for you. Our society is variegated, so it requires subtlety of management.
Right.
You cannot say, well, I have the law, I have regulations, and we impose them equally across the board. Right. It'll be a very unhappy Singapore if we do that.
Okay. So, since we're touching on sensitive issues of faith and culture and all, so in the book you talked about, there was a moment when Lee Kuan Yew called you up and he felt that your Catholicism might affect your decisions as a government official. So were there ever any moments where you felt your faith conflicted with your public role?
As a minister in a secular government, you have to rise above your religion and be fair to everybody and accept that others have different beliefs from you and you cannot be imposing your beliefs on them. But at the same time, there's a question of conscience. There are things you can't do because your conscience says you should not do them. So at that point, you can either say, I will not do it. If others do it, and they can do it in good conscience, let others do it. But I can't do it. But if that makes your position untenable, then maybe you should resign. So when I went to politics, I told my family, I said, treat every term as the last term. Because I may have to resign because I lose an election, or I've got to take responsibility for something which has happened, or have a fundamental disagreement with policies.
Did it ever come to that point where you actually thought, I don't think I can stay in this job because I don't agree with this policy?
There were moments when that thought was in my mind. When we had the problem with the Romanian Charge who had run over some Singaporeans.
I remember that, yeah.
And ran away. And I saw MFA leaving it mostly to the Ministry for Law to handle. So I told them, no, we are the Foreign Ministry, we have to take responsibility. And I told my staff twice that if he slips through our fingers, I may have to resign because Singaporeans will be very upset. And we cannot blame it on the Prime Minister. I said, as a minister, I have to take responsibility. I told that twice to my staff officers. Yes, you have to be prepared to resign when you are in government for various reasons. Yes.
So he did get back to Romania. In the end, he was jailed over there. So what made you change your mind that to stay on in the job?
No, because justice was done.
Right.
And I mentioned this in the first chapter of the second book, on the three popes, how by complete chance, there I was at St. Peter's, waiting for the papal mass to end so that I can greet Pope Benedict. Sitting behind me was a Romanian foreign minister. And my staff said, no, he's there. I said, ask if we can have a bilateral meeting. We had a bilateral meeting.
And you brought this up?
I brought this up. And with his permission, we took a photograph and I issued a statement. And he assured me that Romania will act on this within Romanian law. There was no extradition treaty. But luckily in Romania, if you commit a crime overseas, which is a crime in Romania, you can be prosecuted in Romania. And so justice was done.
Right. So, continuing in this same vein about sensitive social issues, what do you make of the fact that conservative groups, especially religious groups, have become so vocal and assertive, especially when it comes to controversial laws like Section 3778?
And the problem with 377 is it was an inherited law. If it was not in the statutes, I don't think it would have been brought into the statutes. So 377 is the same number in India and in other Commonwealth jurisdictions because it all came from the mother legislation, which was probably India. I'm not sure. So this is a position we are in where if the law were not there, it would not have been put into place. And we say, well, we will not act on it. That's not satisfactory. So at some point in time, government will have to rationalize it. But the moment you rationalize it, people will say, look, this is a slippery slope. Then after that, it will be gay marriage and adoption by gay parents. So when they see a slippery slope, they say, no, don't take the first step. But if there's an assurance that it's not a slippery slope, I think we would have diffused the issue. So to me, the key is what assurance the government can give to these groups that you talk about, that this is not a slippery slope.
That there will be red lines that will not be crossed.
Which will not be crossed, not just a red tape, which can be easily removed, but something firmer than that, which comforts them. Then we would have diffused this issue.
So there was a very interesting suggestion in the book that new Singapore citizens should be approved by a jury of ordinary Singaporeans, and that citizenship should actually have provisional status for 5 years. Do you think that perhaps citizenship has been perhaps handed out too easily, and for lack of a better word, perhaps even devalued in some sense?
There will always be cases where what you've just said apply. Mistakes are always made. But unlike many countries, I think we are quite brutal in the way we administer the system, that if you're not a benefit to Singapore, don't come. As an MP, this was harsh policy because we could have many Singaporeans who have liaisons who are married, but we don't allow their spouses into Singapore. And we don't allow their children to have citizenship rights. It's a very harsh policy. Perhaps it cannot be helped because we are a small country, we have limited space. Lee Kuan Yew once said, apropos Vietnamese refugees coming to Singapore on boats, that we have to grow calluses in our hearts because otherwise we store for ourselves huge problems. At the same time, so we are completely self-interested. So we bring in clever people, wealthy people, connected people. But some of them, when they come in, they think that they are a blessing to Singaporeans and they act as if we should be very pleased that they are here. I met some of them when I was a minister or a member of parliament. They talk as if we owed them. I said, wait a minute. Yes, we welcome your contribution, but we don't owe you. So I had to gently put them in their places. Now, this psychology is very important, that Singaporeans do not feel that the foreigners whom we bring in are lording over them and looking down on them and misbehaving. So some change in the balance must be achieved. When I was in Liechtenstein, I asked them, how do you bring in new citizens? They said, oh, the canton must agree. So you must have lived there, you must speak the language, you must know your neighbors. Then they said, yeah, okay, be one of us. Now, we can't do that in Singapore because we are not such a settled population. But at the same time, inserting ordinary Singaporeans into the decision-making process will change the entire psychology.
Right.
To begin with, you're a foreigner and you want to be a citizen. You know now, those who live near very good schools, so they do lollipop volunteers, right?
Yeah.
They do all kinds of things
Yeah.
to get their children into those schools. And the school board will assess you and say, no, are you really sincere? No, we put you to a further test.
Right.
Yeah. And in the end, if you are just doing it to get your child in, you'll be found out. So you've got to really, you have to do certain things, but you've got to evince certain attitudes, and those attitudes have got to be internalized. So we should work that into our citizenship process.
So it sounds
let's say you tell this jury, right? We can include you and me and others. You say, okay, 10 candidates, you interview all of them, blackball 2. Don't blackball more than 2, because we need them, That's blackball 2. Those 2 will leave the room with their tails between their hind legs. And they'll be telling everyone else, look, this is a tough process. People will learn from this. People will behave differently after that. They will, like those wanting to go into good school, their children to go into good schools, they will begin to do certain things. And they'll be questioned. Oh, you've done all this? Oh, since when? What else have you done? What do you know about the Indian community in Singapore? What are the dietary requirements of Muslims, for example?
Yeah.
Subsequent applicants will be doing homework.
Right.
And I think that psychology is very useful. And Singaporeans will say, good. Yes, we want them.
Okay, so it sounds like you're suggesting a test of sincerity, but also combined with looking at maybe how the new citizens can contribute in more intangible ways as opposed to bringing wealth or jobs, and also giving Singaporeans a say, in a sense, letting the community see, well, do we want to accept these newcomers?
Yes.
Okay.
Then we put Singaporeans on a higher pedestal. They are now judges and jurors.
You might get very harsh judges and jurors.
Oh, I don't think so. You tell them, look, you rank them, and we will blackball the bottom 2. They'll do it happily.
Okay. So I want to ask about the media scene now, given that you were once the Mita minister.
Yes.
So of course, as you will know, the SPH Media Trust is getting up to $900 million in taxpayers' money over the next 5 years. So I think the question on everyone's minds is this investment justified, given that I think it's no secret the Straits Times is pro-establishment, and often it faces, for lack of a better term, a credibility issue. So what do you make of this investment? Is it justified?
If we say, let the market decide, then invariably news will degenerate into entertainment. And there'll be a race towards salacious entertainment, with maybe news inserted here and there when it supports entertainment. And we see that in many countries. This would be very bad for Singapore. You remember in the old days, we had radio TV licensing fee, and that ensured that broadcasts were balanced, were wholesome. For newspapers, we have classifieds, and that helped finance them. Government notices were put in newspapers. So there's always been an element of state intervention and state subsidies in the way the media was managed in Singapore. I think we've removed radio and TV license fees, and with the social media, classified ads have been hollowed out from the print media. So they all face great difficulties. Yet we all know that the way we talk to ourselves and the way we communicate with government, the way government communicates to us, is very important for the cohesion of a society. So I do not know whether $900 million is too much or too little, but you do need state subvention. because it is for the common good.
But then the thing is for the average reader, so the paper is still, it still costs money to buy the paper. And often there's a perception that, well, the reporting is skewed. It's not giving a full picture of things. It may not be completely objective. So I think for the average reader, like we would say, well, my taxpayers' money is going to subsidizing the paper and the product isn't quite up to the mark. Then I think you can see like why there might be a bit of discontent there.
In any society, it's important that governments are able to communicate directly and accurately to the people. The problem in many societies is what government says is intermediated through the media, which is constantly looking for angles. Oh, the speech is so boring. And you've said that before. So this is where the sentence has a different adjective. So suddenly you zoom in on the adjective and that becomes a headline. The reader might not have the same historical record, so he just said, oh, that's what the minister talked about. But that was not what he talked about. But he did convey a nuance. I grappled with this issue when I was Mita minister. And I use this metaphor often. It's like the Vatican. When the Pope speaks, he must be able to communicate directly to the last Catholic in the world. And there are over 1 billion of them. He does this through the official media. Radio Vaticana, Vatican Television, L'Osservatore Romania. I was in the Vatican for many years, so I'm somewhat familiar with the Vatican media. So they put out complete statements, encyclicals, raw footages. Then Catholic dioceses all over the world, in Germany, in America, in Singapore, they'll take these sources and then they'll package stories around it. Then there are others, like Yahoo News and CNN, they'll say, well, we zoom in on this part. Now it's okay, you are Catholic, you read what the Vatican puts out, you read what CNN has put out, you read what Straits has put out. You get diversity of views, but you know what the Pope has said. Now, it's very important that in Singapore that we know what the government has communicated. And this, the mainstream media must do. Yahoo News is not mainstream media. So we have more room to look for angles and to say other things. And in a sense, it has this responsibility to put out the whole picture, which the mainstream media has to put out, which you and others may find boring, but which is still important.
I understand what you're saying, that people must know what exactly it is that the government has said. But then if looking to the reader, and if they feel that, I have to go to Yahoo to find maybe a more nuanced picture, a more objective picture, then isn't the mainstream media slowly just losing its audience and therefore its effectiveness?
Well, I won't say more objective. Yahoo News or news agencies like yourself may find interesting angles, may bring in collateral material and enrich a story. I think that's good for the reader to access or the listener to hear. But you cannot put all this into the mainstream media because it confuses the main message.
Right.
So depending on your market position, as it were, there are certain disciplines that you have to work under. If you were to do what the mainstream media does, no one will access you. But if you look at it in totality, we need everyone in the ecosystem. But in that ecosystem, there must be the mainstream media. Because if we don't, we're in trouble. Like many countries are in trouble.
I thought you raised an interesting point about the Pope and how there are all these various media outlets to broadcast his message. So it got me thinking about the 4G leadership, because in a sense, It's almost like the new prime minister was chosen, like so-called by a college of cardinals. It feels to me that the selection process is still very opaque, very short on details. The mainstream media puts out that official narrative, and very uncritically so. We are told that 15 of 19 people voted for Lawrence Wong, but we are not told, for example, how many rounds of elections were there, or rather rounds of voting there were. Why was it necessary to bring back Khaw Boon Wan to do the process? So, to me, it still feels like something very mysterious, very akin to the College of Cardinals. So, my question is, what do you make of this selection process? Should it be more transparent? Should more details have been given?
The PAP developed a cadre system and almost a Leninist structure because it had to combat the communists. And Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh, they learned from the Bolshevik experience. So Lenin was a master of organization. He had a concept called democratic centralism. We have democracy, but certain decisions are made secretively. That is the inheritance of the PAP. I don't think it's simply a matter of choice. I think it arises out of the culture of a people. So if you look at the opposition parties in Singapore, they're all similarly organized. Why? Maybe it's in the nature of a society that you don't want people to lose face, you don't want to have to, as it were, air dirty linen in public, and you only present outcomes. You assure people that there was an internal process, and these are the outcomes. I think a lot of it originates from our culture as Asians.
So what about, say, an open leadership election, like what you see the Tories or Labour in the UK? Would that work for us? Would that be better?
I don't think so. No. I don't think so. I think it will lead to a lot of politicking, and we may lose the effectiveness of leadership. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the West, in England, in America, do they throw up the best leaders? I'm not so sure.
So
yes.
Lawrence Wong
yes.
is, of course, the heir apparent.
Yes.
Well, what is your take on him? Do you know him well?
I don't know him well.
Right.
I know Ikang well because Ikang worked for me. I've interacted with Chan Chun Sing a number of times. Lawrence Wong, much less. So I don't really have personal knowledge of him. So what I depend on is Yahoo News and
and the mainstream media.
Other media, including the mainstream media.
Yeah. But what is your impression of him?
Well, he's eloquent. He handled COVID well. I think he comes across friendly. But we have to wait for a crisis to see whether behind the exterior there is a core. Yeah.
Going back to the book, there was a point where you said, crucial is trust that the government is not partial and tries to be fair, even if the decisions taken are not all to our liking. How do you think the level of trust by Singaporeans in their government is today compared to in your time?
I would say it's pretty high. So if you look at COVID, generally speaking, people accept that the government tries to take the best decisions. It's not always right because there's never complete information. And sometimes the wrong judgment calls might have been made. But people accept that they tried their best. That it was not because somebody was protecting his shares or had vested interest in this drug company or in such a restriction being imposed. So this trust in government is very important. How would you compare to previous times? Well, society was simpler then. The needs were more basic: education, housing, healthcare. because of the progress we have made, there's a greater diversity of views in Singapore.
Greater demands.
There are greater demands, which are fine. But in the end, do they trust government? Do they have faith in the system? I say yes. And that's very important to the good functioning of Singapore.
Yeah. So conversely, right, I want to ask about critics of the government. So back in 1994, I'm sure you recall the Catherine Lim affair, when she wrote that article, and there was a very strong response from the government. And if I remember clearly, you said that she was bo tua bo sui, right? In the sense that she was not respecting her place in the hierarchy. Do you still feel that way? And what do you make of modern day critics like Cherian, George, or Donald Low?
No, in any society, there has to be li. There has to be a way by which we interact with one another. We are talking to one another. You respect me as an interviewee, I respect you as an interviewer. We don't cut into each other's sentences. A certain dignity and mutual respect. So it is with the cameraman, so it is with your viewers. Civilization is not possible if human relationships are not regulated by form, by precedent, by dignity. If you have a situation where, out of the blue in a classroom, students shout at their teachers, education breaks down. If at home, children decide to call parents by their first names, or you may do so in a Caucasian family, something happens. So in any society, there has to be decorum, there has to be a way by which we interact with one another. I don't think I made those remarks. They were not accurately reported, by the way,
right? Okay.
With respect to Catherine Lim. I think it was with respect to the way journalists were criticizing the Speaker of Parliament.
Right, okay.
Now, you can say the Speaker of Parliament was unfair, that he was rude. But you should not talk about him as if you were talking about your friend or a subordinate and diminishing his status as a speaker. Remember, there are certain things which enjoy parliamentary privilege because parliaments make laws. And you cannot allow the executive to lightly intrude into the parliamentary sphere. Who maintains order in parliament is the speaker. So in form, all MPs, including the Prime Minister, have to bow before the speaker. And he walks in with a sergeant at arms carrying a mace, originally to clobber those who are misbehaving. But these are important rituals. Now, if you're up in the gallery and you say, no, I'm not bound by this, I will just throw verbal stones. Singaporeans reading it will say, well, the speaker is like one of us. So the Chinese govern an empire on the basis of li. They are a ministry for li. That's why we have titles, we have uniforms, we take our places. That's why on Chinese New Year we give ang paos, carefully adjusted to the degree of relationship. It's important for us to know what our children receive so that we know what the signals being sent. So from li, we have li mao, we have liu, you see. This was the point I was making. We cannot have a free-for-all. And it is dependent on the society you're in. When I was in Cambridge, last day of class in engineering school, students threw paper darts at the professors. I looked around. I said, I can't do that. The professors just laugh. If you do that in Singapore, something breaks down. It's not good for us. It's okay when we visit other countries and we are foreign students. We may even join them, but you don't do it here. We may do other things here which they don't do elsewhere. When my son graduated from Peking University, I saw many people carrying bouquets of flowers. So my wife said, oh, we should have bought one for our son. I found out later that it was not for the graduates. It was for the graduates to give to their parents.
Ah, okay.
I said, that's interesting. And there's merit in it. And when they played their videos, it was not about the accomplishments of the students and how great they were and how brilliant and so on. It was to thank janitors, the people who served in the canteens, the people who cleaned the classrooms, the college staff. I thought, yeah, it reminds me that we are Chinese and not Westerners.
I understand your point about conforming to certain norms and respecting the hierarchy. But going back to the Catherine Lin matter, I believe there was a certain chilling effect in the way that for other people, in the way that the government responded. So my question is, for all that there is a need to respect authority or to conform to certain norms, surely there has to be room for robust criticism of the government without fear of reprisal.
Was there any reprisal against Catherine Lim? I don't remember.
Well, I mean, maybe not in very substantive terms, but surely it's not a pleasant thing to have. I believe PM Goh responded as well. Surely it's not a pleasant thing to be told off in public by the PM.
Well, I'm not so sure. If she felt qualified to criticize, say, PM Goh in a certain way, and PM Goh replies critically to her, I think she should accept it. Mm-hmm. You can't say PM Goh should just accept it without response. I think it's a robust exchange. Mm-hmm. But that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is we can be critical of each other. We can convey the same points, but in a way which respects one another.
A sense of propriety.
A sense of propriety, a sense of respect for the other. You see, I treat you as a fellow human being, also with feelings. So I have feelings, and I bristle when others ignore my feelings. But you have feelings too. Yeah, you're a politician, so you should be more thick-skinned. Fair point. Yeah. Politicians should be more thick-skinned than those who are criticizing them, because they're in public office. But they also have feelings. So I think if we remain true to our culture, I'm not saying that culture is immutable, but if we remain true to our cultural norms, and not just say, look, this is what they do in Taipei, this is what they do in the US Congress, mm-hmm. in the House of Parliament in London, we should do it here. I don't think so. I think here we do it within our own set, within our own history and tradition and cultural norms. Yeah. Then we can have very good debate, very good exchanges without being personal, without being ad hominem in our attacks.
Of course, earlier you mentioned Minister Ong. So I can see from your Facebook page that you still do meet the former Aljunied team quite regularly, right? So I wanted to ask, so 11 years on from the defeat in Aljunied, what are your thoughts about it now? What kind of feelings does it bring up? And do you think you would have done anything differently in hindsight?
Well, at that time there was a tide flowing, which was very strong. I was right in front of it, so we were washed away. That tide reversed when Lee Kuan Yew passed away, but I think it returned in the last general election. I'm a Taoist, I look at these things in a detached way, and sooner or later, a certain rebalancing in Singapore's politics would have happened. Could I have prevented it myself in Aljunied? I think it would have been very difficult. Yeah, and I did not send any personal animosity towards me, even though I lost. In fact, quite the contrary. I sensed a lot of people feeling awkward, almost feeling uncomfortable. I was talking to some of my grassroots leaders. They said the following morning in the lifts, people look at each other and they all kept quiet. And My old friend Habib Hassan from the Alwi Mosque, you see. Well, maybe he was trying to please me, but I said, no, your popularity rating went up 3 times after you lost. Yeah, but politics is like this. I mean, you have to accept it for what it is. I served 23 years in government. Those were very good years. I hope I made some contributions here and there. It made me a better person. And when I look back, yeah, those were years which enriched my life.
So no regrets?
Oh, not at all.
Okay. So, of course, you left politics not too long after that. And I think that was quite surprising to many people. And I know the other day you said in the interview that you don't intend to run for president. But is there anything that might change your mind? Will we ever see you in politics again?
I've retired from the SCF. So many of the BGNS until I reached the age of 55 or something. Then they changed what was within the parentheses to retire.
Yeah.
But if in a wartime situation, they said, no, we need you to come back to do certain things. Yeah? Of course, I have to say yes. Yeah, I mean, so equally, politics is part of life. So if I can help, I will of course help. Yeah. In an appropriate way. I cannot say, look, I've retired. I will not look back at Singapore. I mean, this book is written for Singaporeans by a Singaporean.
So would you ever change your mind about running for president?
No, as I can see it.
Okay. Right. Okay, so I want to move on to China.
Yes.
So I think in the book you write very eloquently with a lot of nuance and insight into China. I think obviously because you have family ties and many years of dealing with and observing them. So I want to ask, where do you see Singapore's ties with China going? Will we still come under pressure to take sides with them because we are a Chinese majority nation?
Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, mainland, they're part of one family. We are relatives. So we share certain emotions. We are more interested in what goes on than strangers. It also leads to complexities in relationship. I mean, if you're a foreigner dealing with the family, that's okay. But if you're a relative dealing with family, then you get entangled. Yeah. And you can say, well, that's no good. I'd rather be friends, not relatives. But sometimes relatives need each other's help. And we being 3/4 Chinese in Singapore, this is the reality, this is who we are. Yeah. So we have feelings. And these feelings complicate policies, but they're also a benefit to us. So when the two sides had the first meeting, the Wangku talks, it was in Singapore. When Xi Jinping met Ma Ying-jeou, it was in Singapore. They couldn't meet on one side or the other, but they chose Singapore. Why? Because they know we are well-meaning relatives. So this makes our life more complicated, but it's also a huge advantage. And don't forget, China will be a huge reality for us. ASEAN is already the biggest trading partner of China, overtaking Europe, by a margin that will continue to widen. And we're in the heart of ASEAN. There's much going for us if we understand the relationship and be disciplined in what we do.
So my question is, what about the next generation of Singapore leaders who are now leading that relationship with China? Of course, specifically the 4G leaders. Do you think they will be able to maintain that very complex balance, walking that tightrope?
Well, younger generations have taken over, so we have to adjust. I mean, the relationship between Lee Kuan Yew and Deng Xiaoping and other Chinese leaders in that era, I mean, that's past. So every new generation must strike its own relationships and strike its own appropriate balance. The work is never done. It's constantly, like any relationship, to be refreshed, renewed, adjusted. Yeah. And you cannot say, well, these are the things my parents have done, they're good enough. No, they're never good enough. The young must also meet. They must also know each other. And must learn to cry and laugh with one another. So it is an intertwined destiny. These are intertwined destinies. And in a sense, there's a re-entry of China in Singapore with the recent movement of people. So you find a much greater diversity of Chinese foods now. You get a lot of mala, you get Dongbei food, you get Shantung food. The cuisine in Singapore has been enriched. And Singapore, in a much smaller way, has also influenced China here and there. No city in China is unaware of the Singapore model. They all study it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily for positive lessons, sometimes also a negative lesson.
Yeah.
That's fine, that's natural. Yeah. But it means that when we tell someone we are Singaporean in China, they view us with a certain regard. That's something we have inherited, it's precious. It doesn't last. It has to be renewed and constantly built up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So conversely, I'm sure you'll be aware, there's been a lot of talk about Chinese influence operations in Singapore, especially with regard to elites being cultivated by the Chinese. How vulnerable do you think we are on this front? Are people aware of it?
Singapore is vulnerable from all fronts. It's not just the Chinese in Singapore, the Muslims, the Indians. Everybody is being influenced. And all those who think us important will always try to influence internally. So we have to be watchful. Yeah. Our guards must never be down because the attempt to influence us surreptitiously will always be there. Singaporeans must have a certain common sense that, yeah, we are friends. But when someone asks you, oh, by the way, can you tell us what was discussed within the ministry? You say, oh, you can't do that. Shame on you. I mean, without quite saying so,
Yeah.
You should not talk to us like that. Yeah. So a certain dignity, a certain sense of self, we must never forget the project.
But do you think that awareness is there?
Of course. Well, if the awareness is there, it doesn't mean that some Singaporeans will not succumb to temptations. Because if they were to receive benefits, they may then do things which they may not otherwise do. So these 12 security agencies will have to make sure that the overall situation is maintained.
So in a sense, it's an ever-present danger.
Oh, of course.
Back in March, I think, I'm sure you recall, there was a fair bit of controversy over your Facebook post that shared the Tucker Carlson story about alleged biolabs in Ukraine.
Yes.
There was even accusations that from certain fronts that maybe even you yourself had been compromised by the Chinese. So what did you make of the controversy and the criticism?
Curiously, the criticism came from different directions. Some thought I was carrying water for the Chinese. Others thought I was carrying water for Trump because of Tucker Carlson. And in fact, one senior American told me, he says, it's not good for you to quote Tucker Carlson because American society is very divided. What did I do? I was very intrigued that Tucker Carlson, on this particular issue, sided with the Chinese. So I said, from an unexpected quarter, I was deliberately detached and ambiguous. But because the issue is so fraught, many people jump onto it from different directions.
But do you see why that people might feel that way, given that your status as a former cabinet minister and Tucker Carlson, who is often seen as a less than reliable source, who has reported on conspiracy theories, and be that as it may that your caption was detached, but even placing that post there might be seen as a form of endorsement?
No, that issue of biolabs in Ukraine, that issue of the origin of COVID, these are not settled issues. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs takes a very strong position on the origin of COVID-19. And in the internet, you hear all kinds of perspectives, all kinds of scientists and doctors giving their views. We should not lightly say, well, it's this and not that. I think we should continue listening and making our own judgments.
But do you think that perhaps if, I think people's issue was with the source of the story, Tucker Carlson, right? So if the source had been, for example, the New York Times, perhaps, or just any credible media outlet, then perhaps there wouldn't have been as much.
No, I wasn't saying that what Tucker Carlson said had particular veracity. What I'm saying is, I was surprised that he openly sided with the Chinese in his program. That to me was what was interesting.
Okay, so going back to the book, you talk about the re-education camps in Xinjiang and how Chinese policies there have led to peace in the region. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is that you broadly support these policies, or at least feel that they are necessary?
The policies on Islamic extremism in Xinjiang instituted by the Chinese have been very tough. They have neglected this issue for too long, and they had a spate of violence which was spreading, so they decided they had to act decisively. Is it for us to tell the Chinese that, look, you should do this and not do that? Islamic extremism is not a problem in China only. It's a problem in Singapore, it's a problem in the West. We've just seen the way Salman Rushdie was brutally attacked in New York. So we have a problem. And different countries solve it in different ways. So at one end, the US has Guantanamo, the CIA has rendition programs. And they use drones to go after Al-Qaeda and Islamic State leaders. In China, they decided better re-educate the Muslim minorities in Xinjiang. So you have camps with high walls and barbed wire. And people say, well, that's genocide. No, that's to use the word genocide too loosely. Yeah. Is there genocide? The population has increased. So there's no biological genocide. Is there cultural genocide? Well, all those who've been to Xinjiang will know that there's no cultural genocide. Is there strong action taken against Muslims? No doubt. Are they excessive? I cannot be a judge of that, because every country faces this problem. No one with complete success. I mean, in Singapore, for instance, Muis vets every sermon given on Fridays in mosque. Yeah. Is that censorship? Well, not for me to say, but it has kept the peace in Singapore. We had a fright when we suddenly found a GI network operating here, and it's not gone.
But I mean, perhaps you might dispute this, but I think human rights abuses, heavy surveillance in Xinjiang, I believe is now the most surveilled area on earth. This all been extensively documented. I mean, you talk about, in Singapore, yes, Muis vets every sermon, but I don't think they have shut down mosques. They have not detained anyone. I don't think our policies will ever become so harsh. And I understand what you're saying about we are not in a position to judge, but given all the reports that are coming out of Xinjiang, it suggests something that is very, not just harsh, but
these are predominantly Western reports that you are referring to. I don't just read Western reports. I read other reports. And to me, it's interesting that no Muslim country has condemned China for its policies on Xinjiang. Who condemned China? They're the Western countries. And when I was on my Croatian cruise recently, someone told this story about what an Italian professor in China said. It was quite cute. So take it in that spirit. You see, the Americans are not known for loving Chinese. They're not known for loving Muslims either. But strangely, they love Chinese Muslims a lot.
Okay, so going back to the book again, so you talked about your Christian values, your Confucian values, and how there is a need to respect people's identity rather than forcibly changing it, because it will only break them. Do you not find your views on Xinjiang and your personal values to be in conflict?
No, I've been to Xinjiang twice. I have cousins who go to Xinjiang. There was a period when they won't go to Xinjiang because they're unsafe. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, I was in touch with one of my cousins because a relative had died there. He said, oh, he was in Xinjiang. He said it was very safe. He went there as a tourist.
Urumqi.
I think it was more than Urumqi. Okay. He spent quite a few days there.
But I mean, talking about your personal values and the very tough policies in Xinjiang, as you've acknowledged, do you not find this to be in conflict?
No. I mean, well, if they torture people, if they treat them badly, that I do not know. I'm not countenancing that. But if you tell me, is it immoral for the Chinese government to act decisively against extremism in Xinjiang? I say yes. I mean, it is justified because you let it get worse, the result will be violence and many people will die.
Okay.
I'm not approving the methods, As I say, I cannot judge them on the methods.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I want to end off by asking this. So I was talking to different people who have worked closely with you in the past. One of them suggested...
Tell me only the nice bits.
Yes, I think most people enjoyed working with you, and they found you very cerebral, a deep thinker. But one of them suggested that while you may give the impression of being very cerebral and very liberal in your thinking, your instincts are actually conservative and illiberal. Would you agree with that assessment?
After the 91 elections, I was criticized as being a liberal because we had relaxed censorship and that had become an issue during the election. Somewhere in one of my 3 volumes, I said I didn't know how to wear that label because I didn't think it fit very well on me. So some people say I'm liberal, some people say I'm very conservative, very traditional. I'd rather not be reduced to such simplifications. I mean, take me for what I am. Yeah. And I think all human beings are complicated with many facets.
So you say take me for what I am, how would you describe yourself? At least on the political spectrum.
There's a side of me from my young days, which is Taoist, which is always detaching. I'm always looking at myself from a distance. I say, well, okay. It's a strange thing to describe, but somehow this has been a part of me since I was a teenager. I'm always looking at myself and seeing myself in a flow. And I'm never too happy, I'm never too sad because of that. Yeah.
Constantly evolving.
Constantly trying to be in the flow.
In the flow.
In the flow. Yeah. Accepting there are things you cannot control. Right. There are forces at work. You move with them. You try and move against them, you just bloody yourself. But you can always, over time, position yourself to be in the better part of the flow and not get caught in whirlpools or cross currents.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know why, but I'm constantly zooming in and zooming out. Yeah. Zooming in, me being subject, and zooming out, me being as object. Yeah. I think that's being Taoist.
Right. Okay. I think that's all we have to ask. Thank you very much for being with us here today, Mr. Yeo.
Thank you.